Welcome to the Mold Matters podcast. Whether you are looking for help recovering from mold illness or just want to learn more about creating a safe environment for your family, this podcast is the place for you.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mold Matters podcast. Thanks for joining us. We're going to do a podcast today on a topic that we haven't done before. And there's a couple different ways to talk about this topic. As our good friend in Australia kind of refers to this, Mike, you're the first one that told me about this term.
Rising damp. Yeah. Shout out to Tom in Australia,
who was with us on the last podcast. In fact, we should have. I was thinking about this. We should have had him on here talking about the rising damp.
Yeah, we should have.
They have, because it does occur here in the U.S., but on a larger scale in Australia and the UK, where I just came back from and saw, some interesting rising damp situations. Rising damp, as well as water table issues, they kind of go hand in hand. So
yeah, but for whatever reason, here in the States, we never adopted the term rising damp that I'm aware of.
I've never heard it, honestly. Yeah. But I think you pointed out something when we were chatting earlier. We're pretty strict about where you can put a home and what the water table issues are when you're building a home. And we have a lot of desert, a lot of dry areas where I think it's more easily, it's easier to build homes on dry land. And so maybe the combination of things, we don't have a rising damp scenario like they do in the UK. So
maybe, but you know what else I was thinking though, Jerry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but when we were building one of our homes, the plans called for it to go, I can't remember exactly, but it was like go down 8 feet, right? Mm-hmm. And pour your footings.
Yeah.
Well, when we got to the 8 foot level, we hit water. So our builder on his own decided, we can't go that deep. We're going to have constant problems. So we raised it up a foot or two, and I think we avoided a lot of problems in the future just because we caught it during the building process.
Yeah. So basically, in order to really talk about this topic, and it does relate to mold, because obviously water equals mold in most cases. So this is a definitely a water topic and comes into play in our homes in the form of mold. So water table. We talk about this concept. Do you have a good way to kind of articulate what water table is?
Well, when you're setting up for like Thanksgiving dinner, like my mom liked to have the main servings, and then she'd have a smaller round one where we put the water. We called it the water table. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah. So let's give a. I got a technical definition here.
Okay.
A water table describes the boundary between water-saturated ground and unsaturated ground. So there's pretty much water in ground, all the way up to the surface or fairly close to the surface. But there is a point at which it's fully saturated. And that kind of division between, moistish water and full-on saturated water is the water table.
And also, I think what plays into it, Jer, is when you build a home, when they dig the hole is actually a lot bigger than the actual footings, right?
Yeah.
So then they pour the footings, and then they pour the foundation, and then they backfill that outside of the foundation.
They tar the foundation usually, right?
Yeah, they do. They tar it.
And then they backfill around the house or foundation.
Well, I think that backfill is just normally going to take on water like crazy if there's water in the area, because even though they try to pack it back down in and get it to firm up again, it's still going to take on water like crazy.
Yeah, we talk about homes settling over the first 5-10 years.
Yeah.
You pack it as well as you can with those big tractors that landscape guys have, and it still isn't like dirt that's been sitting there for hundreds of years.
Right.
And as we're going to discuss here, so the important part with water table and then water table affecting our homes is this concept referred to as capillary action. And you're the resident expert, so I'm going to give you all the hard questions. Tell us a little more about capillary action.
I don't know the technical details of it. I just know as a mold remediator, the the basic physics of it is water wants to go from wet to dry. And so where you see it in a home is first thing that gets saturated that you don't want to be saturated is the soil around the home. Once that's saturated, right next to that is usually a dry foundation, or at least drier than what the soil is. And so now that, because of capillary action, that moisture wants to saturate the foundation. Then I tell people once that gets saturated, now it's going to go into the 2x4s or the furring strips that are inside that basement if you have a finished basement. And then once that gets saturated, it just wants to keep rolling. And now you're into the paper on the sheetrock. And then eventually, okay, now I've got visible mold because the water traveled all the way from that wet soil clear through the foundation, clear through the plywood, or not the plywood, the 2x4s, clear through the sheetrock paper. And then eventually you've got moist paper. And if you have an elevated mold load in your home, now you've got yourself a nice little place for mold.
Yeah, it's honestly pretty incredible how far water can travel just by kind of being absorbed into the substrate that's next to it and traveling. Actually, the reason I just thought of it is because when you were talking about backfill, that dirt that you backfill with is more porous in a sense, right? Because it hasn't been packed down, and that's kind of where capillary action works off those pores as well, right? It's the porous substrates, which our houses are made of. Everything we make our houses out of is porous. Cement, like you said.
Cement is very porous.
Yeah.
I've never met a well-to-do cement.
Very porous.
It's porous.
Dun.
Yeah.
Wood, sheetrock is very porous. Paper's porous. Right. So I mean, pretty much everything we build our houses out of is porous. I mean, you've got the tar on the foundation, which is not, but really, yeah, that's the idea. If there's a porous substrate next to the water source and it's dry, like you're saying, it wants to move and almost create an equilibrium in a sense. So yeah, basically this capillary action, which is kind of this physics principle that is used in lots of science.
We ought to get Jason in on this conversation.
We should have a good friend scientist come in and talk about it.
Yeah.
But in our lives, I think it's just important to realize that if the water source is near the home, then there is a strong possibility, even though it's not maybe, there's a foundation in the way and there's a wall. I'm inside and the water's outside. It can really make its way into there over time.
Yeah, I tell people this. Actually, you can have water problems in your basement from really two different things. One is just naturally a rising damp situation or an elevated water table, what we call it here in the States. And then your other issue is drainage coming off of the roof. If your rain gutters are not working correctly and you don't have extensions on the bottom of your rain gutters to get the water away from the first 3 or 4 feet of your foundation, that's going to do the same thing that rising damp does.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people many times where they're nervous that because they have water in the basement, they'll say to me, "I think my foundation may be cracked." Well, it may be cracked, but that's not what's causing the water problem. The water problem is in your basement because the soil is saturated. The house was never built to be like a boat, although they have houseboats.
Yeah,
they do have those.
Yeah.
But not in our neighborhood.
No. But they do have them. They do have them in the UK.
Houseboats?
When I was just there, it's pretty much the water tables.
They're all houseboats.
So they're all houseboats.
Okay. Okay. So I wonder if the building codes are more stringent here in the States.
Yeah.
That they just won't let you build in certain areas.
Yeah, that'd be worth looking into. I'm not sure on that at all.
Well, I'll tell you this. This just brought back an old memory from when I was a kid. My dad had a friend. In fact, he was our religious leader in our area, and he used to say, "Don't ever build where the cattails grow, because cattails want to grow in swampy areas,
Right.
So
Yeah. I'm pretty sure, we have some swampy in the US,
yeah,
Florida,
yeah,
some of the places in the South,
yeah.
Louisiana, Mississippi, those areas. I imagine you get close to those swamplands. Well, you've seen, you can envision those, a lot of those trailers or mobile homes, they
Hmm.
put them up on those stilts
Lots. Yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
And even the stilts, if you think of those houses that are just off of the coast on stilts, you'll see the water line is maybe 3, 4, 5 feet
Yeah,
above the water line, and you might think, oh, the tide was higher. But in many cases, it's just the water through capillary action is just soaked up to
just
that,
saturated it up to that
soaked it
point.
up.
Yeah,
So yeah, kind of back to when I was just in the UK, and shout out to you guys in the UK. But yeah, I only went into a couple of houses, but I believe both of them, if I can recall correctly. But there was an issue where you could see um, the water line on the wall, 3 feet up. It tended to be in the corners, but not always. Yeah, both houses. One was just right under the window, but you could see the water line, and it wasn't a water stain yet. It was just I think they call it the tide or something, or I don't remember the exact term for that line, but basically you can kind of see the water had wicked up, and that's pretty incredible that from the ground it could manifest itself three
yeah,
feet up in your house.
yeah.
And like you're saying, in Utah and other places where basements are quite common, it's probably doing that, and we just don't know. It doesn't always make its way to the sheetrock, but
Right.
sometimes it's
Yeah.
so.
I honestly think more problems in Utah are because of poor rain gutter
Mhm.
function
Yeah,
than actual rising water table.
yeah.
But I could be wrong on that.
So if someone, Mike, has I don't know, they have rising damp, moisture's getting into their house, into their foundation. You've kind of mentioned one remedy. Okay, figure out how the water is even touching the foundation.
Yeah.
So if it's the
Right.
gutters, you need to fix those.
Yeah.
Or if it's the downspout, are you diverting the water far enough away?
Yeah.
What what other kinds of things can people do, or remedies do we have?
Yeah. So things that we recommend is for sure the grade of the soil around the home.
Hmm.
It's got to be built up so that when water hits close to the home itself, it's going to flow away from the house instead of flowing towards the house.
Hmm.
Um, you mentioned rain gutters. I have heard of people digging out around the foundation and putting in like a French drain around the foundation.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, if you actually have a elevated water table or a rising damp like they do in Australia, that may be a lost cause, because
yeah,
it's like you're sitting on top of a never-ending river.
yeah.
But you can find an expert in the area that would understand what's going on in that area and get better advice. But whatever you can do to get the soil dried out. I have never seen anybody have good luck with trying to seal the cement from the inside.
Hmm.
It just, I mean, I guess if you don't have any other choice, it's worth a try. But I've never seen it really work great. You
Are you,
just got to figure out a way to get that soil dry.
yeah, are you talking about those injections they'll do?
No, I
Or
was actually taught there's actually a product where they'll paint the inside of the cement foundation
oh, like a
and
sealant
try to
almost?
seal it out,
Oh
or
yeah,
you know. But
yeah,
no, the injections as well is
yeah.
a
I,
idea.
I don't know. I don't know how effective they are. I've heard of times when they're working. I've heard of times when they're not. But essentially, they go down to I think the lowest level of mortar
Yeah,
on the brick or whatever it is, the lowest level on the house they can get to, and they inject essentially a cream or a sealant of
like
some
a
sort that
like a,
doesn't allow it to. It hits that before it hits any of the porous substrates that it can
right.
absorb into.
So it kind of stops the capillary action in its
Yeah,
tracks. Yeah,
yeah. And I still think, again, if you're living in an area where that's your only option, I think it's worth trying that and some of these other things just to
yeah,
see, what you can do to keep it away. I think digging trenches and drains, might be a solid option as well, because really, except in rare cases, it's not gonna. I think I think they say 3 or 4 feet's kind of the max that it's gonna be able to go, because as it goes deeper, it loses water, right? So it's
right.
it's it's diluting itself as the further it goes through capillary action, and it hits this point where it has nothing left. There's no water left to pass on, and I think in most cases 3 or 4 feet, maybe 5 feet is your max. So if you can dig trenches and kind of get the water somehow away from, you know, at least your living space.
Yeah.
You know, you can keep it in the lower parts of the foundation or something. I think you have a fighting chance. But
So I will point out this one thing is that I've seen a lot of really, really wet basements that are not finished, and it's still a relatively healthy home. And the reason for that is because the cement on the foundation is not a great source for a food source for mold.
Yeah.
You're going to have a lot more mold problems if you have a fully finished basement if the basement's wet than if you have just the cement down there. So that's one thing to keep in mind, I guess, before you finish a basement is make sure you're going to be able to maintain that dry environment down there before you start putting walls up.
Yeah.
Because then you all of a sudden have got kind of a problem. We got a wet cement floor as opposed to we've got mold everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, this reminds me of a house that I went to a couple of years ago up in Park City. It was a nice, beautiful home. I remember looking online afterwards. How much is this home? Because this couple had just bought the house and they found mold in the crawl space, and it was like a $7 million home. And coincidentally, it had a creek going through. You know, it was 2 homes essentially connected by a small bridge, and then a little creek through the 2 halves.
Yeah.
Not a good idea, I realized after doing the full investigation. That creek just happened to, you know, saturate kind of the soil around it and then saturate the foundation. Because so I'm crawling around in the crawl space and trying to troubleshoot. Well, they knew there was mold down there, and I went down on my belly, and a good 65 by 45 foot chunk of that crawl space ceiling was just covered in mold. And what we finally determined was that creek had led to the foundation absorbing the moisture. And then that kind of just led to it being really humid down there. The water soaked through, and it just created a really humid environment in the crawl space. And of course, ventilation wasn't that great down there either. But they were so shocked that this huge patch was caused from that creek
on the outside of the house.
On the outside of the house. Yeah. So I think you have to be really careful with water, bodies of water around your house. Even I remember a lady recently, not long ago, calling, and she had a pond. Just it came up to like 3 feet from her house, 4, maybe 3.
Was it a real pond or a homemade pond?
Yeah, I think it was a homemade.
Those always just make my head pop off.
Yeah.
Like why are you putting 500 gallons of water right by your foundation? You know.
Yeah. And it's one of those tricky ones for me. It's like I want to fix your mold issue because it was causing mold, but you have a lot of work to do. If you want long-term, you know, protection in your home. So
the other thing I've seen is people love to build like brick walls or rock walls right in front of their house, right next to the home, and then they'll plant flowers or whatever.
Yeah.
So they'll build the wall up 2 or 3 feet, and then it's like a nice little flower area. Yeah. If you don't arrange for drainage for that thing to drain, you've created all kinds of problems.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that same thing too. That soil needs to be typically a little more fluffy.
It's soft and fluffy.
Soft and fluffy. You need to put lots of water on it.
Right. Brand new flowers. Got to water them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's not a good scenario.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty good coverage of the topic, Mike. Unless you can think of anything else.
Yeah. No. Like you mentioned. Shout out to our friends in the UK and Tom in Australia and their rising damp.
Yeah, and I know here in the South we've got some of that too, but it's definitely something that when I'm doing my investigations, mold investigations, from time to time it comes into play. We have actually a patch here in Pleasant Grove. I only learned this, you know, by going to some homes there, and the neighbor, and then those people would tell me like, we're in this area that's notorious for a high water table, just this unique little patch, and kind of everyone in the neighborhood struggled with it. And I guess that's one thing to say about water table. It's not, well, 2 things I know about it is it's not really flat like a table. I think usually it just follows the terrain, the topography. And then number 2, it can change from area to area pretty easily.
Oh, and from times of the year as well. Yeah.
Rain. I mean, rain affects it.
Yeah.
And that's why some of these rainy places have to really they really struggle with water table. But
Even along the Wasatch Front, we're building homes way farther west than I would have ever thought they could 30 years ago.
yeah,
The Great Salt Lake itself is way down.
yeah, it's receding.
Yeah, so the water table is way down. I mean, literally, I talked about don't build where the cattails grow.
Yeah.
They're building where the cattails grew back then, and hopefully it stays dry out there. But it's a worry.
I know. We pray for all this moisture out here in the desert.
Yeah.
If it comes, then
The people in the West aren't praying for that. They're good.
yeah.
They're fine.
Yeah. Keep dry. Stay dry. Oh man, their prayers are winning out so far. So
Yeah.
Anyways, awesome.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for joining us. We continue to provide content that's relevant to water and mold and health. And thank you for listening. And please tune in for other episodes on these topics.
Hey, and happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy
to
Thanksgiving.
everybody.
Next week.
And thanks to Nez on the other side of the glass.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to the Mold Matters podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more in-depth information on mold illness and recovery.